Friday. It's another Mavens of Manufacturing Day. And this week's episode is sponsored by Factory Fix. Factory Fix is a manufacturing talent platform that combines the power of a talent network featuring over 400,000 skilled manufacturing pros and a recruiting platform built specifically for the manufacturing industry. I'm really excited today because I have a fellow tech writer on, and I'm a nerd for words, so I'm really excited to share that passion with another writer. Her name is Kate J. Stephenson, and she is the founding principal for Dyad Engineering. Hello, Kate. How are you doing?
Hey, doing all right. Happy Friday, everybody. Glad to be here, and glad also to be with fellow nerds. So just glad to be here.
Thanks for joining us. So I like to start off each conversation of Mavens with just a brief background of yourself, and how did you end up where you are today? So where did it all start?
Oh my gosh, long and very strange journey. I think earlier you had asked me a question like, did you always know you wanted to do this growing up? And I was like, no. So right now I am a engineering Ph.D. I'm about 20 years into my career. I've worked on about 60 different products at this point, primarily medical device. So lots of heavy regulated industry, life and death situations. But if you ask what I was when I was like 12 years old, I wanted to be a princess. I was a book nerd. I was the dreamy romantic artist. And my parents literally thought I would be the starving artist in the attic. And so how the heck I ended up getting into super high-tech engineering PhD, advanced analytics work, not so sure. But you might have seen some signs when I left for college. I actually took 7 toolboxes with me.
Okay.
So my dad was a big mechanical technician at a major government lab. His dad ran a machine shop. His dad ran a machine shop. So, but I was the first one to head to college. And so I grew up messing around in my dad's garage, usually doing what I thought would be more artsy projects. And when I left for college, I thought I'd be doing, at one point I did art. At one point I was pre-med. I ended up declaring engineering super late. I did not love math. I was like 50th average percentile at math at best, but I like to write. And so first generation college student, got my degree, ran out, got my first job at a startup, basically building stuff at a workbench, little teeny tiny things. And fast forward about 10, 15 years later, I went in and out of academia, in and out of industry, working with startups, doing lots of writing and analyzing startups until about 3.5 years ago, pre-pandemic, I decided, hey, I've worked for a lot of design firms. I've worked for a lot of businesses. Let me start my own business, just focusing on what I love to do. And that is studying engineering, manufacturing, and technology around early stage ventures and doing a lot of writing and analysis around it. So I'm a Dyad Engineering is a one-woman shop. And I basically like to think of myself as an industry academic. I'm an academic in that I geek out. I love research. I love data. I love writing. But my topic of focus, what I love to study, is the manufacturing, design, and engineering industries.
Mm-hmm. So can you kind of dive in then, how you're connecting writing with what you're doing in the research part of it? Because I think, when I started out in high school, I was not the top 50% in math. I was actually lower. And I was always geared towards writing, and I didn't learn about technical writing until much later on in life. I actually started at Milwaukee University because I got pregnant with my daughter when I was going to school in Minnesota. And it was a classmate of mine that was like, you should really try professional and technical writing. And I'm like, what does that even mean? And she's like, you write about technology. She's like, it's really good for single parents like us because there's more money behind it versus the creative route. And I'm like, well, that sounds pretty solid with my situation. So that's really how I ended up in this field. And I fell in love with it right away because I had a dad who was in manufacturing, but we didn't really connect on that level, him and I, like you did with your dad. You seem to have more of a connection there because you were actually tinkering in his garage, where my dad would just leave and then come back and kind of help me with my math homework. but I still failed at it. So how did you make that connection with writing and what you're doing now in terms of, the technical writing part of it?
Well, it's less about making a connection as just feeling that there's this deep split that I'm constantly fighting in my career, because people think of engineers as, oh, we do math, we build things, we work at the workbench, and we have no social skills and we don't talk much. And versus, I love writing, like, whether it's like, I read constantly lots of fiction. I wrote a lot of fiction actually growing up. I consumed sci-fi by large quantities. And so part of what really fascinated me about engineering and manufacturing stuff was all the sci-fi stories I read. And then I ended up getting into going away from the writing, going, okay, I'm going to be an engineer. I'm going to do CAD. I'm going to do SolidWorks. I'm going to build stuff at the bench. But in medical device, you have to write. Our quality systems, it's a really weird thing in that, if you cannot write in medical device, you should not be in medical device. Because whether you're writing out your SOPs, your MPIs, your regulatory submissions, your test reports, your manufacturing assessments, like all of these documents you have to write. And you have to write it really well, because otherwise you end up hurting people or your business goes down. And I would meet a lot of engineers who hated that part. And for me, it was just what I did. It wasn't necessarily that I liked it or didn't. It's just that I was the only one in the room who would take notes at meetings. I had the fattest, thickest design workbooks of anybody because I wrote everything down.
Yeah.
I was just really detailed and nerdy about that. So the writing part never bothered me. And in some ways it was hard because, especially as a woman, like you end up getting shoved into what's called like quality documentation a lot in medical device. Okay. It's like, oh, you can write? Oh, then you can't design. You must not be very creative. So it's like, okay, go write. Oh, you go take the notes while the real engineers come up with the design. And so it was always this fight between, yeah, I can write, but I also like to design. I'm an engineer. I can do the math. I didn't like it, but I could do it.
Yeah.
And I would have lots of crazy ideas. And so there's definitely this tension between, oh, you're a writer or you're an engineer. And I'm like, no, I'm both. I like to write about engineering.
And I think that's a great point that you bring up too, because a lot of engineers, they do have that stereotype of not being sociable, of not being very good writers. I've met a handful of engineers who are not very good at written text. And I think, there are those few like yourself that have the ability to do both, to be creative, to be able to design something and then actually write about it. So you're squashing all of those misconceptions. And I think that's great, because I think there are a bunch of other women out there who have the ability to do both. They can be creative and they can also do all of the design and the math stuff. But, there is this pressure to do one over the other, or one versus another, and you don't necessarily have to do that. So can you give us more detail on Dyad Engineering then, and like some of the stuff that you're helping other companies do in terms of the writing stuff, and if there's more to than the writing stuff that you're providing as well?
Yeah. So one of the things that I bring up a lot when I talk about writing, and this is I'm trying to train my sons as well into this, is the importance of empathy for your reader. Basically knowing who is reading what you're writing. So I work with an incredibly diverse set of groups. So I'm working on everything from small business grants for federal programs for research funding, where you are writing for PhDs. You are extremely high level, very dry writing. And then you switch that to your blogs, where you are writing for potentially your customers. And your customers could be everything. Most of them don't have PhDs. Some of them, they may have MBAs. Some of them, they may just be, basically have a 4-year degree or even a high school degree. And figuring out the tone, the phrase, are they, do they make decisions more emotionally or more analytically? It really, what information you put in and what you leave out, and the tone of the writing, the length of the writing, the format of the writing, all those you really have to think about. I mean, you're basically designing a product, but your product happens to be a chunk of writing. So all those things about, okay, who's your user? What are their needs? What are the requirements for the writing? You really have to spec those out instead of just start throwing words on a page.
Yeah, that's a good point. I want to touch on some of the people who are tuning in. So we have Angela Thurman. Hi, Angela. Thanks for joining us. We also have Jeffrey Bevington. Thanks, Jeff, for joining us. Angela said nerd for words. Love it. Hank, hi from the junior board of directors. So Hank always tunes in with his two daughters, and he's
Nice.
going to take the information from this podcast as well as Automation Ladies and some other podcasts, and he's actually working with his daughters. So I had Barbie the welder on one episode, and they were like, "Can we weld?" And he like helped them start welding in his garage. So he does a lot of stuff with them based off of these podcasts, which I think is really, really cool because we need more parents that work with their kids like that. And then Angela goes, "Yep, I'm a stereotypical engineer." And then we have Whitney. Hi, Whitney. Good morning. Thanks for joining us. Feel free to ask questions too, you guys. I'll pull those in as well because again, I don't want to be the only one hogging up Kate's time today. So if you have questions, so your job, I mean, me personally as a content creator, because I don't just do writing, I do video stuff as well too. And it can get really stressful and hard if you don't have like your sort of routine and process in place. So I have a process in place that helps me make sure that I'm creating the content that I need to create on a consistent basis. And then in terms of like working with clients, I also have my own personal process that I go through so that I'm checking everything off and I know that I'm asking the right questions. I'm scheduling things. I give myself the appropriate time to review what I'm writing and copy edit it. Can you kind of share with us what your process is and what a typical day in your life looks like with everything that you're doing? Because again, medical is very complex, and how you design things doesn't necessarily mean you can actually manufacture them, because there's a lot of things you got to take in consideration, like the materials and the environment that you're working within, if it's going to be something internally versus externally, how big it's going to be. Like there's so many things involved with medical that if you don't write about it appropriately, again, you can end up harming someone, and you don't want to do that. So what does your process look like on a daily basis?
Okay, well, the process is actually two things going on here. So yeah, I'm an engineer and I'm a writer, but I'm also a businesswoman. So I'm running my own consulting firm. So there's definitely a lot of things I had to learn about sales, about marketing, about managing clients, figuring out what is my primary value add. When I first started my business, I thought I was like, oh, I'm going to be doing CAD. I'm going to be doing engineering. And I'm realizing, okay, that is way outsourced, and you can find people very cheap on the other side of the world right now to do that. So that's not you don't need a PhD to do CAD. And so figuring out where is my value add, and the writing came out. And when I first started doing consulting, I was like, well, my biggest thing is strategy. I sit down with people and we talk through where they are, especially for early stage ventures. I find somebody who's either as a startup or they're with an innovation group in a large corporation. And we go like, okay, what are your problems? Where are you? What are your deliverables? And sometimes they go, okay, we have pieces of writing that need to be done. Sometimes we have research that needs to be done. And so what you really do is you have kind of this initial strategy meeting, and then you put together a plan. And what I usually do then is depending on their needs, their budget, it's like, okay, we can either put together a whole project, which is, a 3 to 6 month project where we're going to deliver all these different pieces of content. We're going to do this kind of research. Or it's like, hey, we kind of a la carte, like, hey, no, I just need a white paper, 1 week about this topic. And then maybe they'll come back and say, okay, well, now I need another white paper 2 months from now. And so for me, it's as part of my process has been doing a lot of like figuring out what my client needs, writing up proposals, identifying very quickly what these kind of standard elements of a proposal are. And so when people think about writing, in my mind, I'm going like, okay, there are technical briefs, there are blogs, there are white papers, there are academic publications, there's different products that I sell, and they're all custom created products. But I really have to think about, and each one of those has a template. Okay. I'm going like, okay, these are the standard elements of every one of these. And part of the hard part, I'm about a little over 3 years old right now, is I'm still custom generating these templates for clients. And the goal is that eventually this is going to be very standardized for me. The resources I go to for research, I have a standard set of a dozen databases that I know, okay, I need this piece of info, this piece of info, this piece of info. It gets to the point where you can practically write a software program. And one of these days I may get there. My husband's actually has pivoted into a data scientist role. And right now I'm doing a lot of manual search and collecting of data and integrating it into my writing. And eventually I just wanted like dashboard where I could say, hey, I'm potentially looking in this new venture. There's this cool manufacturing technology. And I need to know what the market is. I need to know what patents are out there. I need to know who their competitors are. And I just want to have like a little piece of software that will run out, get all that information and pull together it into this brief that is the actual product I generate for my clients.
That's really cool. Are you going to stay specifically within medical, or are there other industries that you're looking into or that you've touched on? Because again, medical, there's so much involved with it. So do you just want to stay there, or do you want to look into other areas as well too? Because manufacturing and engineering is really broad, and there's a lot of different areas that you can go into. So any interest in
this is where I have to take off my engineer and writer hat and put my businesswoman hat back on and go like, okay, we are potentially heading into a recession right now. Mm-hmm. Venture funding and early ventures basically have been gone nosedive through the pandemic. A lot of people are kind of drawing back in, going, we're only going to do R&D. We're only going to contribute and look for products that directly help our bottom line. And so for me, I have to look at, okay, I was really good at the crazy disruptive tech analysis, like what's going to happen in 5-10 years. And right now, the way the industry's going is they're like, look, that's the first program that gets cut when we've got to reduce our budgets. And so the last 6 months have been pretty miserable for me. And so what I look at, so what do people still need right now? We know that the federal government just invested a huge amount of money in jumpstarting the manufacturing ecosystem here in the U.S. So people are going to need grant writers to be able to go after and procure those funds. If you are a small size manufacturer and you're like, hey, I've always thought about this project. Hey, there are potentially funds right now that could fund that project because the government is actively trying to build that up right now. Products that directly result in sales. So things like case studies, white papers, documenting and providing content that will improve your sales pipeline. That's a big need right now. Mm-hmm. Even looking at auditing and reporting on some of these grant management is a potential area right now. And so all of these areas are things that, the basic skills are still there, the engineering, the technology. And right now, I don't know if my biggest customers are going to be medical device or not. A lot of the big medical device companies, the startups are kind of struggling right now. And the big medical device companies, a lot of them have their own in-house writers. So I may have to go into other industries and to find my customer base. So this is part of, I've worked with startups for a long time. I understand in many ways I am a startup. I'm still trying to identify who my key, most successful clients are and you've got to pivot with the industry right now.
Right.
I can't just say, hey, I'm a medical device writer. If the money's not there for my clients, if I have someone walk up who's a 3D printing expert or who they do automated e-platforms for just-in-time manufacturing, I'm going to go right for those guys.
Right.
And
I was going to ask you that because you are technically a startup company. So has there been any major lessons that you learned working with startup companies that you see yourself going through and applying to your own business strategy, and how that has helped, working with other strategies, how that has helped apply to your own process and business strategy?
And so probably the two things that, probably held me off from doing my own company as long as possible were sales and marketing and financial management. And it gets to the point, if you were going to run in your own company, everyone says, oh, you can set your own schedule, do the work that you love, choose the clients you love. But the downside of that is you can't say, I don't want to do sales and marketing, or I don't want to have to handle financial stuff. Mm-hmm. And so when I started my company, those were the two areas I realized I had to really educate myself in. And so I read every book I could find on sales and marketing, was taking classes. And even now I'm still going back and forth. Is my webpage content appropriate? Am I reaching my correct audience? Is my value proposition clear? Because that's now in my head. And the other part is the financial. And so one is learning how to communicate your value and find your clients and communicate in such a way that you can come together and make that sale. The other is financial flow, especially early on. Last year, I made a huge amount of money. I had a giant pharma client. I was contracted full-time, 14 months, full consultant rate. It was awesome. And then you go through 6 months of no money, but the federal government wants your taxes on all that money you made last year. Mm-hmm. And so cash flow, they say you work at small wages, you make small amounts of income, but now you go from where you have big chunks of money coming in, but then long periods of time. And so how you even out that flow, you start having to do things like home equity lines of credit. Like I own my house, I have equity in my house. So I have to set up a line of credit that where if I don't get paid for 3 months, I can still pay my mortgage.
Yeah.
And I have to set up my bank account such that I have my bank account where I keep funds that I know I'm going to have to file my taxes. I have to find a really good accountant who I call and regularly talk with every couple of weeks to optimize. Okay, what can I expense? Where can I put this money? What kind of documentation do I need? And so you have to become much more financially savvy.
Yeah. I agree with that because we had that conversation before this one, and we have Nikki joining us today from Automation Ladies. Thanks, Nikki, for joining us today. She's like, find that ICP and go after it. And she's like, yeah, all the hidden work entrepreneurs have to do is never glamorize. It sure is not. And then, right, an entrepreneur wears all the hats. But when we talked before this conversation, you made a really good point. I think some people want to start their own business and try the entrepreneur life out without considering all of the risks that are involved. And the finances is one of those things. So I made sure before I started Z Inc. Solutions and Mavens, I had to talk to my husband about it because I was like, here's the deal. Like, we have to have a 2-income household. We have to. So if there's a time period where I'm not making money or getting projects pulled in, can we survive with just one income and a part income? Like, can we do that? So it was a lot of discussion on what we needed to have. So I feel like, anybody wanting to start out, they should have some sort of cushion financially before taking that dive. Would you agree with that or disagree with that?
I would definitely agree with that. You should basically, I would not start a company if you cannot manage your own household finances.
Right.
If you don't know if you're going to be able to pay your rent check every month, if you never checkbook, you can't balance. It used to say balance your checkbook. People don't balance checkbooks anymore. It used to be. Now I'm not great at that. My husband is freaking awesome. It's like he was one of those guys who had his checkbook balanced to the penny for a decade.
Yeah.
Is never paid. Never paid a bill late. And so that gave me a lot of confidence knowing that he knows exactly how much it costs to run our household. And we know exactly how much I would have to bring in from my company. Now, the other side of this, so we talk about, can you, over the course of the next year or two, balance out your finances? The other question I got to deal with is, I'm 20 years into my career. This is my peak earning time. And so not only do I have to deal with the consequences of can I meet the needs this year, realize that I should also be putting money aside for retirement. I'm supposed to be thinking about my kids going to college in 5 years and realizing that there is an entrepreneurial penalty here. That, maybe I can meet the needs over the next 2 years while I'm starting my company up. But can I recover my lost earnings? And right now, with my engineering Ph.D., I could make a ton of cash going and working for Apple or Google right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I realize if I cannot get to that level of earning within the next couple of years, I may be regretting this a decade from now because I'm not going to have that nest egg built up, that potential earning. And so I've really got to think of myself like, it may be that, yes, I can start a company, but is now the right time to start it? It may be that I need to work my mainstream job, build up that capital, have that. I have some great friends who are like, hey, go work that corporate job for 30 years, retire at 50, and then go do your startup. Because you already have your retirement fund taken care of. You can totally bomb your startup and it won't affect your ability to retire.
Yeah.
And so there's definitely that long-term, lifelong planning that you've got to think about. And so sometimes you see these guys who are in their 20s and 30s going like, I want to do a startup. Like they've never held a job. They have no 401k. And they're realizing, when you hit your 30s or 40s, you're going to have kids. You're going to want to buy a house. And your credit record is going to be horrible.
Yeah.
And so there's all this overall financial management you got to think about, as well as thinking about the terms of, can I make my business succeed today, tomorrow, the next couple of years?
Yeah. I think what would have been helpful for me, at least, is if growing up in high school, they did a better job teaching kids how to save their money and do finances. And I'm finding that to be a bigger issue even still with my daughter. She didn't know how to save money unless I told her how to do it. I was like, you have to make yourself your first bill that you pay. always put something in a savings account so that you can start building that savings up. And then if something happens, God forbid, like you at least have a cushion to do that. And it was like really a mind shift because she was so used to me buying everything for her. So she's like, I don't need money. And I'm like, you do need money when you're an adult. Like, I'm not going to be paying for your adult life. Like, we got to readjust this. So I think like maybe starting to teach kids about finances while they're in high school and making that actually a requirement would be helpful, especially for these younger generations who might not know like how to start that stuff out. So I've had a question and I totally forgot where I was going with it, but I can ask another question. So when you were going through, engineering and figuring out whether or not you wanted to start your business and everything, who have been like your main mentors? Because I feel like when you're going through engineering, which is heavily male dominated as it is, we need mentors to keep encouraging us, especially during those hard days when we're like, okay, this is not the field for me. I'm not good at math, but I'm more creative. Now they're saying I need to do all the writing and not the designing. Who have been some of those people where they're just like, no, just keep going. You're on the right path. You're doing what you need to be doing, and you can do all of everything that you want to do. Have they been like helping you out throughout your journey, or have you had multiple mentors at each stage of your journey?
Yeah. I would like to say that I've had micro mentors in many different areas of my life. This idea that there's, one of the challenges I realized is there is no one person that I could go to and say, help me how to navigate my life.
Mm-hmm.
Part of that is, for most of my career, the first 15 years of my career, I had 2 female colleagues, and they lasted a matter of months before they moved on to other jobs. I have always had male colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
Finding another mechanical engineer who was older than me, female. I knew one for most of my life, for most of my career. And she was a professor. And I never took a course from her. And it's kind of discouraging in that. Like this is like, I remember once I Googled female mechanical engineer. And can you guess like what was the one thing they all had in common? I had some images come up.
I don't know.
They were dead.
Oh,
every image was like, oh yeah, such and such in 1812 helped set up railroads. It's like,
that's not helpful.
Okay, this is so discouraging. There is no like go-to face of mechanical engineers for women. It's like, really?
Wow. I wonder if that would be the same now if you Google it. How long ago was that?
I'm gonna have to go through and look. I mean, this was like less than a couple years ago, and I was like, okay, don't do that. It's incredibly discouraging.
That's gonna be.
And I'm realizing, okay, I have a list of books I've got to write that I could not find, and one of them is Tales of Awesome Women Mechanical Engineers, because they're out there.
They are.
Engineers don't write. And so someone needs to go out and tell the stories of these amazing women, because they're too busy out there kicking butt and being awesome engineers. Instead of like being on the stage. And so, yes. Okay. So that was the one thing. So that was incredibly discouraging, trying to Google someone who's actually like, and so a lot of my career, so I remember like, first generation going to college, it was like, my parents, they were awesome. They prepared me amazingly, but I couldn't ask them advice about what to do in college. Like growing up, we didn't know any lawyers, doctor, business people. Probably the most awesome part, I got into Stanford, and probably the most awesome thing about going to Stanford was it was my first experience with meeting people who had jobs that I had never experienced. Like I never knew a professor, an engineer, a lawyer, and suddenly I'm meeting these people and learning about these careers. And instead, it wasn't just a Hollywood movie stereotype. They were just real people who went to school, learned something they loved, and are now doing that job.
Yeah.
And it made those jobs a lot more just down to earth for me. Like it wasn't some crazy pie in the sky, this is an amazing heroic type of personality who can do that. Like, no, it's just, okay, engineers aren't all amazing math geniuses. They're just people who actually went to office hours and put the hours in and ground through it and did it.
Yeah.
So along the way, so there were a few amazing people I met in undergrad who were like, just meeting them and opening my eyes, going like, oh, this is what an engineer does. This is what a scientist does. This is what a business person does. And then my first job out of college, working at a startup, I met an amazing, more senior engineer who, this is part of why I say, like, you've got to go work a little bit after your undergrad. People who go, like, I met PhD students who had never had a job. And I was like, how do you do this? Because I learned so much the first 6 months at my first job. There was an amazing senior engineer who he taught me how to lay out a mechanical drawing, how to do a basic tolerance stack up. Looking at, instead of making cool swoopy shapes, it was like, okay, the machinist is going to hate you. No, start with a block, minimize the number of features, the number of cuts he has to do. Okay, there's your design. And it's like, and so a lot of just the practical, like, duh, this is, common sense stuff. I learned on the job from that guy. And he was also the first person I knew who had a master's. And it's like, grad school, like, really smart people do grad school. Like, I could never do that. But then a couple years later, I'm like, okay, well, he did it. Maybe I can do it. I was like, okay, well, I'll go back. I don't think I'll ever do a PhD, but a master's sounds like doable. I'll just do it because I want to do medical, and I want to pivot into medical. So I, went back to school, and I flew through 4 quarters. Like, okay, back to industry, got my job, and that's when I started looking for lifestyle mentors. Because about this time, my husband and I were talking about having kids. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I'm my company's first maternity leave. They've never had a female engineer long enough to have to deal with that.
Yeah.
So I was like, and so they literally said there was no HR. Like we had a big gap in HR. It's like, what are my legal rights for maternity leave? At the time, the company was less than 50 people, which was like, oh, you don't have any rights. It's like, I don't.
Yeah.
The surprising a female engineer and say, how did you negotiate your maternity leave?
Yeah. The surprising thing about that is there's still companies today that don't have an HR department. Yeah. And I recently just worked at a company that did not have a maternity leave policy for whatever reason. And they had to incorporate one because my coworker ended up getting pregnant. And she's like, I have to have maternity leave. Like, this has to be a thing. We need to start incorporating this policy into our process. So it was interesting to know that I worked with a company that didn't have one before, and then they had to bring it in because one of the female workers got pregnant. So we have Ingwer on. She says, happy Friday, Kate Meaghan.
Hello.
They sure do. Alicia Jopin, she's from Automation Ladies as well. She co-hosts with Nikki Gonzalez. She asked if you ever thought about writing about Industry 4.0.
I do a lot, and especially for the medical device industry, because I go to big industry shows about Industry 4.0, and a lot of the technology is not suitable at all for medical for a number of reasons. And I'm going to write a number of articles about that. I have a blog I'm working on called Breaks in the Digital Thread, and it talks about all the multiple processes. Medical devices are complex, not just from the number of parts involved, but the number of coatings, processes, baking, siting, more coatings, more finishes you have to do. Mm-hmm. And connecting all of those, it's all still very manual. It's still very paper heavy. Until the last couple of years, there were still medical device companies that were paper first quality systems, meaning your go-to system was a piece of paper. It wasn't even online. So lots to talk about. So medical device needs Industry 4.0, but I don't think it's the Industry 4.0 a lot of people are talking about. It's something that's going to be in between. This is a whole other area. Meaghan, you talked about who are my clients, who are my business people. Some of the people, it's like, I'm the person in the middle between the Industry 4.0 enthusiasts and the mainstream medical device infrastructure, because there are these two big tensions. Medical devices don't ever do anything we've never done before because the FDA will hate you, and it's unsafe, and it's a risk, and we don't do risk. And Industry 4.0 is like, we can make this so much more efficient. Just change everything you're doing. And so you can see how these two groups of people start just smash into each other. And there's a lot of, it's got to happen. It needs to happen. And I think it's a great opportunity with a lot of this modernization act going on right now. I mean, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Well, even some of their robotics surgical procedures too. Like they're doing more with robotic surgeries. And when that first came out, my mom and I kind of looked at each other, and I'm like, my major concern is what if somebody hacks into the system while you're undergoing surgery? Like the complete sci-fi stuff, right? Like I've watched a ton of sci-fi, and I'm thinking,
okay, so
what goes on with that?
surgical robotics. Like, oh, we've got robots in medical device. Of course, we're going to automate that. It's like, no, those are highly complex surgical robotics completely built by hand. There might be some sensors and some checks involved. And, the software part is probably okay and is pretty advanced as it can be. But actually building the system is probably, 40-year-old tech. Ancient record keeping systems are being used to actually manufacture and create those high-tech robots. So that's what people see. They see, oh, this super high-tech medical device. Yes, but it's being manufactured using technologies that are 30, 40 years old.
That's interesting. Wow. What an exciting place to be a part of. So what other passions outside of like writing and starting your own business and writing blogs? And I really, if you write that book about tales of women mechanical engineers, I want to read that because that's just a great idea.
Like, I don't want another poor young mechanical engineer to try and Google a potential mentor and discover they're all dead.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Go to like you.
Does not help me in my career.
We need to make a wiki page about you now so that when they Google that, you at least pop up and then they can contact you and ask, for inspiration from you. But what other passions do you have?
I have an insane number of passions. And that's actually a huge problem when you're running a business. It's like, yes, I've got that book idea and I've got 6 other book ideas. So I just have to make a little money and then I can go write those books. So if anybody wants to do a authorship grant and just give me a bucket of money so I can sit and go write all these awesome books, yes, Industry 4.0 for medical devices needs to be done. Even just medical manufacturing in general. The first book I want to write is called Making Medical, because all of these techniques about how you actually manufacture these devices, there's a few textbooks out there, but there is no popular literature that explains a lot of the realities about how we work our medical devices. So there's that book. There's midlife PhDs. Like I went back when I was like 2 kids and a mortgage. You look up how to do a PhD, it's all for these 20-somethings. It's a very different way of going about your career and your journey. Like, honestly, there are a lot of people out there who should go back for PhD, but they're 30, 40 years old and they're going like, how do I do that? And like right now, there is a huge amount of government grants going for educational programs to retrain and pivot people in these emerging technologies. Like, hey, maybe you did an undergraduate computer science degree, had to drop out after you had your first kid because the bro culture was driving you bonkers. Go back, get a PhD in advanced automation. The government will pay for you right now and go set up your own consulting firm. Nice. I mean, so I have I have many different passions. Definitely training the next generation, getting more women in STEM and manufacturing. But a lot of the ways that they're doing it right now seem just so wrong to me. They're like, do you love math? Go be an engineer. It's like, no, I hated math. Don't tell girls, love math, be an engineer.
Right.
So find something you love. Realize there's a whole career out there to make the thing you love. And you may have to learn a little math to do it, but don't let that stop you. Yeah. I wish people were saying that instead. Like there are manufacturing jobs in cosmetics, manufacturing jobs in fashion, manufacturing jobs, everything we make, everything that we live around us, somebody had to manufacture it. So if there's any physical object that you love or enjoy, there's a job making it. And it's not just because as soon as they show cars, they show tractors, airplanes, tanks, going, look at this cool stuff you can make. I was like, really? Yeah, it's cool, but I wouldn't spend my life making it.
Right.
Making heart valves for premature infants. Okay, yeah, I can get behind that. But that's a very different kind of manufacturing from what's being seen in the automotive and aerospace world.
Yeah. And that's a really great point too. We have to change how we're talking about different opportunities within STEM. And we have to make sure, because again, it's the math part, right? Not everybody's great at math. And that was one of the things that was told to me. You have to be good at math if you want to do this. And I'm like, well, I suck at math. So I guess that's an out for me. I can't do math. I don't want to do math. I have no interest in it whatsoever. My sister got that gene. I did not. I got the writing gene. So what was next was, oh, you'll be a great teacher or professor. And I'm like, I don't want to be either. So I guess I'm going to be like a gypsy just wandering around. And it wasn't until much later that I found out about technical writing and I fell in love with it. There are a few comments more. We have Inger, meeting different people definitely opens up to new experiences. Yeah. She also said, wow, no maternity leave. I can't even imagine that. It was crazy. I was just like, wait a minute, what? They don't have a policy? Why not? Well, they didn't ever have to use it for anyone. So
Yeah, none of their guys got pregnant.
they just kept going at it. And I'm like, that's so strange to me. And then she goes, an authorship grant would be amazing. So for closing thoughts, because we're a little past on time, but that's okay. What are some advice or tips that you would give other women who want to come into engineering? What sort of advice would you give them? Because again, we have to change our language, especially at the high school level, when talking about some of these opportunities. And we can't just focus on one area where engineering and manufacturing is. Like you said, everything around us is manufactured in some way. And I've spoken with many women where they started out in cosmetics, and then now they're in food sustainability. So how do we cut back on food waste and the packages that we're using in food? How do we redesign those so that we can either recycle them or reuse them at some point, or they're biodegradable, like things like that. It's a lot of science behind it as well too. So what advice would you give to women who are coming into engineering? They don't know if it's the place for them, and then maybe especially talk about in terms of like getting other degrees. So you got your master's, you weren't sure if you were going to get your PhD, and then there was a moment in your life where you're like, yeah, now I'm going to pursue my PhD. So can you?
Okay, we'll get to there easy. I think a lot of it is always question people's expectations about fields and jobs and degrees, and I'll get into that with the PhD. But as far as engineering, I even want to get away from like women who want to go into engineering. Like, I didn't know I wanted to be an engineer. I knew what I liked. And so the advice I give is figure out what you love, what you like, figure out how you work best, and find the job that fits those two. I realized that I love making things. And whether that's making products, making things at a workbench, making companies. And I honestly work best alone in my office. I am an introvert. I will get on stage and when I need to, and I will talk and chat and network, and then I'll go home to my cats and my books and breathe a big sigh of relief. So people sometimes say, to a startup, like, why don't you be an executive power woman? It's like, because then I deal with people all day. I don't want to deal with people all day. And so knowing that about myself has made my job so much easier. But I would love to say, find a passion. And I know as women, we have a lot of big causes. We care very deeply, whether it's about the environment, about children, about teaching, about health. And stop and think about the technical aspects of that. Realize a lot of people don't get into engineering, but that also means a lot of good is done in engineering, and we don't have nearly enough passionate people in it. And so if you're thinking about, I'm into the environment, yeah, go get a chemical engineering degree that allows you to redesign packaging that is sustainable. Like, go and learn the skills you need to make that difference. If you care deeply about child development and about social impact of health, go and get your PhD in public health so you can do the analytics and do the research and the data that is really going to drive the policy that changes people's lives. I've met amazing women who said, oh, I want to be a teacher because I want to help kids. I'm like, no, go into management, go into policy, go into law, go into, like you can impact 30 kids in a room, or you can impact 3 million kids by working and finding, like, basically I always say, go to the highest level that you can obtain. Okay. Constantly challenge yourself and push. And some of that is, making sure you get the financial compensation. So part of always being at the top of your game means that you have the financial resources to keep investing. So part of the reason I started a consulting business is I needed to optimize my income. I wanted to say, like, hey, I want income not just to help myself, but I'm a first generation college student. I have family members who have financial needs. I have different causes. I have women founders of startups that I eventually want to be an investor in. And so there's all these ways that I can eventually help and have great impact, but only if I really choose this difficult path. And so I encourage women to, like, if you are really passionate about something, choose the difficult path that will have the greatest impact. Learn the math if you have to. I mean, I'm not easy at math. I had to work my butt off to learn the math I needed to learn. But it is so rewarding because most people won't do that work.
Yeah. I was recently at a trade show, Pack Expo in Chicago, and they had networking breakfast for all the women who are in packaging and processing. And they had the former CEO of the Pepsi Cola, and then she works with the NFL as well too. And one of the things that she mentioned in her speech was she's like, people learn the most during chaotic situations or when they're most challenged. She's like, when things are easy going, she's like, you don't really learn that much. Yeah, you might learn a little bit, but you learn the most about a situation and experience and about yourself when you're putting yourself through challenges, because you have to like be able to collaborate and you have to critically think about, okay, how can I problem solve this? And she goes, and sometimes she's like, your first idea doesn't work at all. It fails miserably. And she's like, so how do you keep going? How do you pick yourself up? So I think that's a great piece of advice, is to keep challenging yourself and always go for the hardest problems to solve, because you're going to learn the most about yourself and about the situation doing that sort of journey. Hank said Peyton and Aiden are with you on not having the math gene.
I mean, this is one thing I would say. Learn to ask questions and go to office hours. Like, I was so embarrassed because I actually had a really bad math teacher in high school. Like, I grew up in a really rough neighborhood. The math teacher was kind of a scumbag. And I felt really insecure going to Stanford with all these absolutely brilliant math geniuses who were like, oh, yeah, I got it. I got it. The teacher would like draw everything across this board. A lot of times the grad students barely spoke English because they were from all the countries. And I'm going, I have no clue what I just listened to for the last hour. And I would have to be really humble and go to every office hour and say, explain it again, try it again, talk to my friends, build people who knew math better than I did. And honestly, building those skills, asking questions confidently, going after knowledge until I actually got it, and building and asking for help has probably helped my career way more than if I'd been a math genius.
That's great advice too. I feel like some people are afraid to ask questions because they have a sense that they're coming across as not as intelligent as everybody else in the room, or it's like somewhat embarrassing. But I tell my daughter all the time, because she's in college now, I'm like, listen, you're on your own. You have to be more proactive on how much you want to learn and how you're going to learn it. So she was upset because she got a C on her psychology exam. And I'm like, well, at least it wasn't enough. Like, you passed it. And I was like, but if you want to do better, you are going to have to probably start studying earlier, and then you're going to have to go to your professor and build a relationship with them, and pull people in from your class to create study groups, and go to the library, and don't go to this party and drink. Like, you got to start prioritizing things a little bit better if you want to get better grades. And she's like, I know, I'm just mad at myself. And I'm like, you'll get there. So I think those are great pieces of advice. Well, Kate, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day. It's been a huge pleasure talking to you, and I hope you can come back again and keep us updated on how your business is going, and some of the projects that you're working on. I know I connected you to Vince for Manufacturing Masters, and I'm really excited to see what comes out of that relationship, because I think you have such a great wealth of knowledge that's going to be very valuable for other companies within engineering and manufacturing. So really excited about that. Final question before I let you go. If you had one ask for our audience today, what would that ask be for them?
Well, the marketing ask is, if you are a manufacturing engineering firm, you need someone who knows you and can tell your story, definitely reach out to me, dyadengineering.com. On my webpage, you can also find me on LinkedIn. There's a lot of Kate Stephensons, though, so you probably want to do a search for Dyad Engineering, not Kate Stephenson. Otherwise, you'll have like 40 white women who all kind of look the same. But the other ask I have is, I realize popular science has gotten very popular right now. There's all these amazing books written by scientists. What I want to find is more amazing books written by engineers and manufacturers. So if you know of other individuals who've written amazing fiction, nonfiction about manufacturing, about engineering and design, and do it well instead of just a stereotype that is there, let me know. I would love to put together a library of these kind of resources. And I know Andy Ware is out there. He's the Martian. Everyone's like, oh, yeah, there's an engineer who wrote a book. I know there's got to have been a few more. And so I would love to build a library to just inspire. We talked about inspiring future generations. There should be a whole bunch of books saying like, hey, right now there's all those young adult books about coding and learning into tech. It's like, no, we need to have some awesome young adult books about going into manufacturing and building stuff, and not just written by writers, but written by engineers and manufacturers who actually can put together the content will actually teach them what our jobs are like. So definitely, if you have a title or a book that you want to add to the library, please let me know. Obviously, I have lots of books. I have like 10 different shelves throughout my house, and my husband tells me I need to quit buying so many, that I need to go digital. But no, I can't add lots of nice bookmarks. It feels nice. So if you want to make my husband really mad at me, send me more book suggestions.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, Kate. I appreciate it so much. And for all of those who tuned in and left a comment and a question, thank you for tuning in. A little news next week, I'm actually going to be on site for the next live episode of Mavens of Manufacturing. I'm going to Eastern Michigan University for the Digital Diva event, and I'll be talking with Stephanie and Bia from that event to talk about what Digital Divas is, why they're holding this event. So make sure you tune in next week, because that will be an on-site interview, which I'm really excited about. I'm also speaking in front of a group of high school girls and hoping to inspire them to come join us. One final comment we have from Dyad Engineering sharing their stories. Definitely need to show, not just tell. Storytelling is so important. Hashtag show up. And another great show, Meaghan Ziemba. Thank you, Gail, for joining. I really appreciate you being here. A thank you to Factory Fix. They've been our sponsor for the last couple of episodes. So thank you, Factory Fix. In the meantime, I hope you all have a great rest of your Friday. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week live at Michigan. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks.
We know hiring quality manufacturing talent isn't always easy, and that there can be a lot of moving parts. That's why Factory Fix is introducing a powerful new tool, Talent Text. No more candidate no-shows. Talent Text allows you to connect with candidates up to 5 times faster than you or even the best recruiter can. Job openings happen overnight. Candidates fall by the wayside and emails get buried and forgotten. Through 3-directional chat, Factory Fix Talent Pros help put you in the hand of a highly skilled worker within seconds. Find quality faster at factoryfix.com.